Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Sidharth Bhatia. The recent revelations by former Jammu and Kashmir Governor Satyapal Malik in an interview to The Wire about the deaths of 40 soldiers in the Pulwama attack in 2019 have caused major political reverberations. While the government has remained silent, opposition leaders want to know the facts behind the attack, which was then blamed on Pakistan. Malik said Prime Minister Narendra Modi had asked him to keep quiet about some of the questions he had raised about security issues. Malik also talked about corruption in Kashmir and how he was offered huge sums to sign on a file. In fact, two files. In August 2019, soon after the BJP won the general elections, Article 370, which had given Kashmir a special status, was revoked by the government, which shocked the citizens of the state and much of the world. Anuradha Bhasin, executive editor of the Kashmir Times, lived through all of this, and her recent book, Dismantling a State, The Untold Story of Kashmir After Article 370, gives an eyewitness account of what happened then and what has happened since. Bhasin has reported and written about Jammu and Kashmir, its politics, the conflicts, and human rights for over 3 decades. She is also a peace activist. At the moment, she is a John S. Knight Fellow for 22-23 at Stanford University, California, from where she joins us today. Anuradha Bhasin, welcome to the Wire Talks.
Thank you.
So, you must have heard the interview of Satyapal Malik to the Wire. He was the former J&K governor. What do you make of generally what he has said? And I know you have written an article, but overall, what do you make of it?
His interview brings out some of the harsh realities about Indian politics, about how Jammu and Kashmir has been handled by New Delhi. And that is not something that was not in the public domain. I mean, say for instance, about Pulwama attack, several people have called it a false flag operation, but a lot of concerns have been raised about security lapses, the intelligence lapses, and these have just been brushed aside earlier. So this time, these allegations have come from somebody who was in a position of power in Jammu and Kashmir and can say it authoritatively. So that is what makes it extremely serious.
So he is, in that sense, was an insider, and he's not just said false flag or intelligence failure. He has given pretty solid reasons why he's saying that, and he's given a very, very crucial bit of information which may have been known, but he has actually pinpointed it, that the Home Ministry denied aircraft and this 2,500 strong convoy had to travel from Jammu to Srinagar. So that makes it significant, wouldn't you say?
Yes, definitely it is significant. He's talking about he has insiders' information. And then what is shocking is that he talks to the Prime Minister about this. He talks to the NSA about this, and they have asked him to keep quiet. And he also gives reasons. He says he was told, not in exact explicit words, but that they wanted to use it for another occasion, which was elections, is how he speculates it.
And of course, that we saw how it was used.
Definitely, yes.
It whipped up patriotism, it whipped up, anti-Pakistan sentiment, even though I think Pakistan condemning the attack at that time.
Yes, and everything that followed after that, the Balakot operation and...
Yeah. So how have you, as a Kashmiri journalist, following this at that time? Or the other journalists?
I think a lot of us had raised these questions about security lapses and intelligence lapses. The questions of why the choppers were not provided, and why was such a big convoy allowed to proceed on a road? And this is an area which was militancy infested. This is an area which has so many barricades and checks and points. How was a car standing there and, it wasn't even noticed? And even later journalists have pointed out, there was a frontline report which mentioned that 11 security intelligence inputs were ignored. And these intelligence inputs were available from January 5th onwards. So for more than a month, these intelligence inputs had been ignored. And this area had not been fully sanitized as it usually is. Even on a normal day, it is sanitized, even when there are no convoys moving. So these questions were being asked by journalists even back then.
The second important point, there are many important points and I will mention them. The second important point is the fact of corruption. He says that somebody very important came to him and said, sign this file, which is about a Reliance insurance scheme for government servants. And he hints that he would have been richer by 300 crore rupees. Was there a whiff of this at that time?
No, he probably talked about it much later. I think, I don't exactly recall when, but he did mention this earlier that there were two contracts he was actually talking about. And this one particular one about the insurance scheme for employees, which he rejected. And he later talked about that he was going to be offered 150 crore for the other scheme, which was a hydroelectric project. And he mentions several people who would have been involved right now. I mean, earlier he had not given names. Right now he's clearly mentioned Ram Madhav, he's mentioned Hasib Drabu. But earlier during his tenure, he had just mentioned, I think probably at the time that he was an outgoing governor.
There was not a whiff of, but this was after Article 370 was abrogated. Am I right?
Yes, it was. It definitely was, because Satyapal Malik, he was there.
Please go ahead.
Definitely after Article 370 was abrogated, and it's only much later that after this contract that he rejected, he spoke about it.
Do you think that post August 5, 2019, when the Article 370 was abrogated and Jammu Kashmir's special status was withdrawn, corruption in general, was there a sense among journalists especially, but also others, that corruption, large-scale corruption had begun to seep in?
Corruption has always been part of, governance systems, administration, politics. It's always been there. And in Kashmir, even much more so. Or at least there has been large-scale corruption, and that is known. That for getting your work done, for your day-to-day work done, or for business contracts, there is deep-rooted corruption within the government departments. So that was not something new. What was different was in Article 370, when they abrogated, the government said that this will end corruption. One of the things that they said, apart from saying that we are going to bring in development, we are going to bring in democracy, and we are going to bring in peace, is that there has been these former politicians have been extremely corrupt in Jammu and Kashmir, and now we are going to root out corruption. And which is why all the politicians were jailed. But that sense or that corruption was creeping in, I think that came much later, because for the first 6 months, there was very little information available because there was an internet shutdown and a communication blockade. The officers were unwilling to comment on anything. And it was just that the information was not in circulation. And the sense that corruption is creeping in came a little later.
Now, which brings me to the next question I was going to ask anyway. Immediately after this happened, the situation for journalists became quite bad. And I'm focusing on journalism. Of course, the common citizen really felt the brunt of it. There is no question about it. The government kept on saying everything is normal. It's wonderful. Shots of people having street food, not showing the enhanced security. But since your book really goes into how journalists were facing, just bring back those days. They were horrible days, but you've written about them. Just talk about what was the situation for journalists trying to get information.
It was extremely difficult. For the journalists, they had to rely on a media facilitated center. That's what it was called. It was set up by the government, where a few computers were set up and, where the journalists could work, because that was the only place where the internet connectivity was there. The phones were not working. The landline phones were also not working in the first couple of weeks. And the mobile phones, I think they were restored about 2 months later. So all that the journalists could do was visit that media facilitation center and do their work under complete surveillance. There were only 3 computers, more than 100 journalists, and some who had come from outside, so even much more, a bigger number. And they would jostle for space, which meant, people just had about 10 or 15 minutes at the computer, and all their work was under surveillance. So there was a fear factor under which they were operating. Number two, the officers were either too arrogant to talk to them, or the officers were also operating within a climate of fear. So there was very little information available. There was daily press briefing that used to happen. They called it a daily press briefing. On certain days it didn't happen, but where no questions were encouraged by the journalists. One officer would address the press briefing, and that was all you were expected to report. Other than that, the newspapers, several of them were not being published. A couple of them were being published, had been shut down. And even the others, they were just truncated forms of themselves. There was no source of information available. Journalists were unable to even authenticate news from any sources. And there was also a self-imposed fear that if they publish anything critical, that there will be some action. And in later months, as there were journalists who were summoned for reports that were critical of the government, they were harassed, they were intimidated, and that kind of a system continues even today. Much more so today, after the internet ban was lifted and, journalists could probably write more freely, and which they did. Some very good investigated reports started coming out. There were very few, but the government was trying to maintain a complete control. And that was the idea, to silence journalism, to make journalists more pliable, to compel them to only talk about the achievements of the government and not ask questions. And so whoever wrote anything was either summoned, was slapped with criminal cases. Journalists have been arrested and they continue to be arrested. You had recent arrest of one journalist, Irfan Miraj, who's been picked up for doing a story he did in 2000, for documentation work that he did for a human rights organization in 2010. Other than that, Fahad Shah has been arrested, and it's been in the news lately. His PSA has been quashed recently, but he's been arrested not in one case, but in several cases. And I think in one case, bail is still awaited.
Did the journalists go to any senior official? Did the journalists go to the governor at that time? Because I think we go back to Mr. Malik. He was the governor. Did anyone approach him at that time?
I'm not sure if anybody went to the governor, but he was not somebody who was very open to meeting journalists randomly. You have to pass through various, through the Raj Bhavan administration to actually get to him. If I had to meet him as a journalist, I'm not privy to his personal number. I don't know him personally. And many journalists don't. So within the Raj Bhavan, there are bureaucrats and officers sitting. And there were bureaucrats and officers in other departments as well, in the police department. And a lot of journalists talked about that whenever they approached police officers or other officers, they were unwilling to talk. There was arrogance. The other thing was that there is no internet, there are no phones available. So journalists were operating without these tools, which meant that you had to physically go and meet officers. And this was extremely difficult in the kind of situation that there was. The access between the journalists and the entire bureaucracy was completely snapped.
Your petition to the Supreme Court made a difference and internet services started coming back. Was the Supreme Court very, very cooperative? I think you mentioned that it stopped at a particular level. It said it's a fundamental right, but didn't do much about it.
Yeah, not just not do much about it. It said that it's a fundamental right. And since it was a petition about fundamental rights, it took 5 months to decide on the case. And that itself is disappointing. Nonetheless, there are some good things that the Supreme Court laid down, saying that internet cannot be shut for prolonged periods. However, the prolonged period has been left ambiguous. They haven't defined what a prolonged period is. The court has said that, whenever there is an internet shutdown and restrictions like these, there should be in the public domain reasons, specified reasons for why this is being done, and the public needs to know. So that is an important thing. But whenever we continue to have internet shutdowns in Kashmir, as a recent report pointed out, but these orders of how this is being done and why this is being done are not placed in the public domain. So this is a violation of the court order.
You said just now that journalists are still being harassed. What is it like to be a journalist in Kashmir today? I mean, what are people coming into the profession? Are people leaving the profession? What is it like? You are a journalist, in generation journalist. You must have been harassed. I think you're not talking about it. But what is it to be a journalist today?
Be a journalist today, I think even in India it's very difficult, but Kashmir is another different level. And entire Jammu and Kashmir for that matter. I mean, you can just gauge from the way that news from Kashmir has completely been becoming lesser and lesser and reduced to a little trickle with very little information, with very little investigation. It's reduced to a few set things that would be, safer for journalists. Nobody's talking about how the land laws are impacting people. Nobody's talking about, the government is talking about, okay, huge investments have come and big businesses are being set up. Nobody has done a reality check of how this is happening and what is really happening on the ground. And that itself is telling us about what is happening to journalism in Kashmir. Journalists speak about the fears they face while doing a story. Every time that they have to do a story, they have to be extremely cautious. They have to think of, what the repercussions would be, and which reduces their work in the public domain. They have talked about being summoned, and that's even normal now. Journalists no longer talk about being summoned or getting a phone call that this is, from some officer or the other saying that your story is objectionable and yet there will be consequences. And some of them have been summoned to police stations, subjected to long hours of interrogation, sometimes even humiliated, slapped. And these are the fears that's completely killing journalism. If you look at the local newspapers, they are just full of government handouts. And the main lead is always what the lieutenant governor is saying. The people's voices are completely missing. And these are newspapers that were pretty much vibrant in a decade ago.
What is life like today? I recall in August 2019, the government made a statement that not a drop of blood was shed, and that things are very, very good. People have welcomed it. In your book, you write there was an eerie silence and people were numbed by this. You talk about this veteran communist leader. You talk about your own feelings. And of course, you've spoken to so many people on the ground where they are just shell-shocked, as it were. Military presence went up. The whole barbed wire went up. What is it like now? 4 years later?
4 years later, it's very difficult. The information is really not in circulation, I would say.
No, for the common person.
Even for the common person. What is it like? I mean, the way that before 2019, the connection between the journalists and the people was much stronger because the journalists could move out freely, could talk to people freely. That kind of a connectivity has broken. Even in my case, I've been an editor, but I was doing field work. But mostly even sitting in my office, I would often get the feedback from people was automatic. It was coming from different regions. And of course, we had to verify and authenticate all of that. But those kind of channels completely broke. There was, even if you were to go into certain areas and talk to people about what they are facing, the people are unwilling to talk because there is an overwhelming sense of fear that, the moment you open your mouth, there will be some repercussions of some kind of an harassment in some form or the other. So people are unwilling to talk, and even off record, they are unwilling to speak in many cases. So that's the kind of problem that journalists are facing, in bringing out the story. It's not just the government that is officers that are arrogant and unwilling to speak. Ordinary people are sometimes unwilling to talk.
What is life like, on a daily basis?
On a daily basis, I think it would be different. There are so many people. There are 14 million people in the entire state. So there are different stories. But yeah, people are trying to get back to their normal routine lives.
School, college?
School, colleges, yes, they're going on. Businesses are going on. Markets are going on. There is a lot of tourism. And so people connected with tourism are going about their business. It's good business for some. But does it really, normality in Kashmir is sometimes just seen from this very superficial lens. Okay, this is normal. People are going about their lives. How much of the freedom to speak, to assemble, to even vote right now? Voting is usually seen as, is bandied about as the most democratic thing in India, which is wrong. There are other factors. It's not just elections, but there is a continuous process in a democracy where people can speak and can voice their opinions. But even those elections are not happening. So it looks normal on the surface, but it's really not when you don't have the freedom to talk to even within your circles, within smaller circles. I think that's an indication of what is really happening.
We'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back to the Wire Talks. Your article in the New York Times got a lot of criticism from official sources, Anuradha, where you said that everything you had said was completely wrong. Now, without recalling the article here at this moment, you got criticized. You've also written another piece lately where you say that Mr. Malik also should be culpable for a couple of things. I'm saying, can you write these things while you are in Kashmir? Or would you get harassed? You happen to be outside for
right now but that's just by default. But while I was there, I was writing. Definitely I was writing, but I don't know if I was there and I had written for New York Times, it may have been much different, because I noticed, and this is what a lot of journalists have talked about, when you write for a foreign publication, there's more harassment. And I remember I'd written earlier for a piece for Al Jazeera, and yes, there is a bigger backlash that time. But yes, I was harassed in different ways. There were, I wasn't summoned to police stations, but there were different forms of harassing me. If I had been there and written this, maybe the reaction might have been different.
But did anything happen while you were sitting elsewhere?
No.
After the New York Times article,
No, not really.
But the government went out of its way to comment on it.
Yes, definitely they did. They commented on it and they vindicated my stand, because, they have that, I'm saying something as a journalist, I'm bringing out certain evidence over there. And if you have a counter view, you can give a counter view. There was no counter view. You just completely in a blanket way, just say that this is false information. Okay. Place the evidence, place the counter evidence and say what it is like. It wasn't. And there's a complete intolerance to what I was saying. So they proved my point.
Exactly. I think that point has been made here on several other occasions also.
Yes, of course. Of course, in many.
Now, you said tourism is increasing. Government is saying a lot of investment is coming. We don't know because there are no official confirmation of what investment is coming. Is that correct?
Yes, what investment.
So here is the government trying to say everything is going to be rosy, and Article 370 is what has made the difference, but journalists have no way to confirm it. But now there is talk of elections. Do you think, when will they happen?
I haven't heard the talk of elections as yet. They've even stopped talking about elections after the Delimitation Commission report, which was a complete gerrymandering of boundaries. And not just gerrymandering, it was a butchery of boundaries the way it had been done. But they're not talking about elections. And I don't think they're going to have elections, not before they have the Indian elections. They want to be sure that the way that the gerrymandering had been done, it was tailored to suit the ruling party, which is the BJP, and to ensure that the BJP gets a majority in Jammu and Kashmir. I mean, it had, of course, the party has presence in
Jammu.
Jammu region, and which has become stronger in recent years. But post 2019, does it still exist in the way it did in 2014? I am not sure. It needs to be gauged. So they're not very certain about that either. Then definitely in Kashmir, they never really had a presence. And this is what has made them jittery. So, which is why the number of constituencies have increased in Jammu area, more and more constituencies to ensure that there is a Hindu vote bank. They have been created that way. But still, they're not very sure. They're jittery about it. And they do not want to go ahead with elections till they are fully sure that the BJP can win the elections in Jammu and Kashmir. So they'll keep it pending till then, it seems like.
Why do you say they are not confident? Because two things. Maybe devil's advocate, maybe an outsider's view. Jammu had a lot of support for the BJP in the past. One. You said that we don't know whether it still exists. Two, there has been an attempt for Hindu consolidation in various places. Now the districts, the regions have been changed around. Maybe when you say gerrymandering, I suppose you mean by a little bit of manipulation here and there. So they should be kind of more supportive. Why would Jammu region residents not be supportive? Why would the BJP be underconfident? I mean, gee.
Yes, because after 2019, and I said, BJP had consolidated its base in Jammu after 2008. In 2008 elections, they had not won too many seats, but in 2014 that changed completely. They had 25 seats, which was a huge number, earlier it had never been more than 5 or 6. And what changed in post 2019 is that people of Jammu region are not happy with the changes post Article 370. There was a gradual realization. Earlier, they thought that this was only aimed at disempowering Kashmir. And, people in Jammu were not really bothered. But later they realized that they stand to lose their jobs to outsiders, their businesses, their lands, and all of that. So people in Jammu are not happy. People in Jammu feel that if there is going to be an influx of people, it is going to be in Jammu region, not in Kashmir. Because Jammu it is a more peaceful area. 2, it is geographically and culturally linked to mainland India. So anybody who's going to come and settle is going to settle in Jammu region. And that's what they fear. They fear that with opening of jobs and businesses and lands to outsiders, they stand to lose. Their culture is going to be impacted. Of course, Jammu was very cosmopolitan, and over the years, it has absorbed a lot of communities, even Kashmiris. But it has its own distinct culture, and they feel that this would be completely diluted. People from outside Jammu and Kashmir are going to come. So there are reasons why BJP should feel a lack of confidence in going ahead with the elections.
And after the 2019, they could perhaps experiment a bit more. But before 2024, if they hold the elections in whatever form, we shall not go into that detail at this moment. But if they lose, if they don't make it as the majority party, that could be demoralizing otherwise. Is that what?
Yes, exactly. Because Kashmir has always been, at some level for BJP particularly, it has been an election issue, for the pan-Indian elections. It's always been there. The 2019 elections, it was all Kashmir. In 2024, they have nothing on their record book to show. What have they done in India? Except for Article 370. And if Article 370, they're going to project it as a victory. And at the same time, if they lose elections here, they will not be able to use it anymore as election strategy. So I don't think they're going to have elections till then.
Okay, so there was a hint of a talk a few months ago, and that's vanished, you're saying.
That's vanished. And this is interesting because the first thing that they, while revoking Article 370, one of the main promises was that there will now be democracy and equality in Jammu and Kashmir. Of course, right from the very first moment, we've seen how the entire region was militarized. Curfew was imposed. People's day to day civil liberties were completely suspended. Communications were blocked for a long, long time, and which was never democratic. It was the first sign that there is no democracy. There is even lesser democracy than people enjoyed earlier. 4 years later down the line, we still don't have elections. And the elections which most politicians talk about, as I said earlier, it's always projected as the most democratic thing. Even that is not being done.
Yeah. One last question. Do you think there is any possibility that something could happen where it could be either reversed or some kind of mechanism by which civil liberties can be restored in Jammu and Kashmir?
I think civil liberties need to be restored as an immediate. And it's a very difficult thing to reverse because once you've opened the doors for people from outside to settle in, and how much of this has changed at the ground level. When I talk about land, I mean, recently we've had people, they've changed the land laws. And through the land laws, a lot of people are being now rendered homeless. And whether they did not have adequate papers or whether they had them or whether they were really encroachers, it has not been investigated. But people have lost what they had. Can that be given back to them?
Land is the crux of the whole thing.
Land is a very important thing because with land, your economic stability, your financial stability, your psychological even factors, stability, all these are linked to that. So that is one. If people have been given domicile status and, how are you now going to distinguish between the old state subjects and say, okay, the domiciles go back, now you have no right to be here. So these are problematic things. And if they don't start right now, it is going to become even more and more difficult as the years go by. The other thing is that, Kashmir has always been, Kashmiris have never really, there has always been a kind of distance between New Delhi and when people of Kashmir. There's been a lot of alienation and disillusionment, and that alienation has deepened. How can that be reversed? So these are some of the key things that need to be thought about, and I think the way forward would be, I'm not that pessimistic, but I say that these things need to be borne in mind. But the way forward has to be engagement and dialogue with people at various levels, all people of Jammu and Kashmir, including Ladakh. Even Ladakh isn't happy.
Yeah, in a sense, one must say that the way forward was always dialogue, but it's more so right now.
More so right now. You need to have consultations with people at various levels. What do the people want?
And that's not happening at all.
That's not happening. That's never really happened. Other than elections, it's never really happened. People have to be involved at all time in a democracy, in a liberal democracy, even after the elections.
Yeah, so that's, honestly speaking, Anuradha, we are ending on a slightly note of, shall I say, pessimism. But
I want to say pessimism, things change and it's difficult. It's difficult, so it just makes a process forward for a better arrangement more difficult.
You need people at policy level, at the political level who understand this, right?
Yeah, and who are committed and who are visionaries. And that's a little wishful thinking right now, but I'm sure it will change.
Yeah. Just a thought just struck me. A few months ago, Rahul Gandhi unfurled the national flag in Srinagar. Did it make any difference at all? How was it seen?
A lot of people, it was interesting for me because a lot of people came out in Jammu, throughout Jammu region. And what was interesting is when he crossed the Banihal tunnel, there were people in Kashmir coming out, and this was people coming out on their own voluntarily and standing with him. And he was carrying national flag. Flag has never been an issue in Kashmir. Of course, people have been disillusioned and alienated. But it wasn't the flag that they were supporting. or it's never the flag that they are opposing. It's what he was saying that they stood with him. He is asking questions of the government. He is willing to listen to the people. And people wanted to invest in him, it seemed, and invest in him because of what he was saying. So they even stood there while he hoisted the national tricolor. And that was interesting, an interesting development even for me. I hadn't expected that.
Okay. So there we are. It's not all pessimism. Something
Yes.
can spark off hope among people and a sense of dialogue.
Yes, definitely. And that I'm glad you mentioned this, because you need to reach out to people. You need to learn what is it that they want? What are the problems that they're going through?
Yes, that happened throughout the yatra, I'm told, from what
Yeah.
one reads. Of course, as you know,
Rather than bringing in harsh laws and then just cracking down on them, and then these laws are not even in the public domain. What is the government doing? Nobody knows. They suddenly come one day with bulldozers and just demolish your houses. I mean, that's just one example, but much more is happening.
So if somebody speaks a different language, people can look forward to.
Yes, definitely so. Definitely.
Yeah. So I'm glad we looked at the situation in all its complexity rather than just applying, the usual yardsticks about Kashmir, alienation,
War.
distance, etc., etc. Thank you very much for giving
Thank you so much.
perspective, Anuradha. I know that you have your book is really, really compulsory reading for anyone who wants to understand what happened at that time and the history. I was particularly touched, I must just say it in passing, just to promote the book a little, by that story of that 93-year-old communist who started life as a politician at the age of 14 and worked hard to bring about land reforms in Kashmir, as well as, and he says on that particular day, all my work has been wasted. So all these little touches in your book, that's A Dismantled State, the untold story of Article 370 by Anuradha Bhasin, who's our guest today. Thank you very much, Anuradha.
Thank you. A pleasure.
Yes. And we'll be back once again next week with another guest on The Wire Talks. Till then, from me, Sidharth Bhatia, and the rest of the team, goodbye. You can check out this podcast and other interesting ones on the Wire website, the IVM podcast website, app, or wherever else that you get your podcasts. Goodbye from me, Sidharth Bhatia, and the Wire Talks podcast team.